She had not planned to say anything at all. That was the thing Mara Ellison kept returning to in the weeks and months that followed that July afternoon. The fact that she had walked onto Gerald Whitmore's back lawn with no agenda, no rehearsed speeches, no carefully prepared ammunition. She had simply come for the potato salad and the chance to watch her daughter blow out a sparkler before it burned down to her fingers. She had wanted nothing more complicated than that. But life, as Mara had learned many times over, rarely cares what you planned. The Whitmore family cookout was an institution in Claremont Heights, the kind of deeply entrenched social ritual that survived divorces, bankruptcy scares, and the occasional spectacular falling out between siblings. Gerald Whitmore hosted it every summer on the last Saturday of July, and the invitation list had not changed appreciably in 30 years. You were either in or you were out, and being out meant something in Claremont Heights. It meant the whispers followed you to the grocery store, to the school pickup line, to the dry cleaner on 5th. So, people came. Even people who had reasons not to. Even Mara. She arrived at noon in a pale blue sundress she had bought at a consignment shop 3 years prior, carrying a ceramic dish of her grandmother's cold pasta salad and holding the hand of her 9-year-old daughter, Lily, who was already scanning the crowd for the cousins she only saw twice a year. Mara wore her dark hair loose, no jewelry to speak of except the simple watch on her wrist, not because she was performing simplicity, but because she genuinely had not thought about it. There were larger things requiring her attention on any given morning. She did not look like what she was. That was, perhaps, the central fact of the afternoon that nobody present understood until it was far too late to matter. If you enjoy stories where patience becomes its own kind of power, do me a quick favor and tap that like button. It helps more people find this channel. And if you're new here, welcome. And we tell stories that remind you that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous one. Drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you're all watching from. Now, let's go back to that lawn, because what happened there deserves to be told from the beginning. 7 years prior, Mara Ellison had signed her divorce papers on a Tuesday morning in March in the offices of a family law attorney on the 14th floor of a downtown building with a partial view of the river. She had signed with a steady hand. The attorney noted this later, not because steadiness was unusual, but because of the particular quality of Mara's stillness, the sense that she had already moved through the grief of it and arrived somewhere quieter and more purposeful on the other side. The marriage to Derek Holt had lasted 6 years. They had met when Mara was 28, working as a junior architectural designer at a mid-sized firm that specialized in commercial renovations. Derek was a corporate finance director with his father's name on a regional investment firm, a square jaw, and a confidence that Mara had initially mistaken for security. It took approximately 2 years of marriage to understand the difference between confidence and contempt, and another 2 to accept that the distinction mattered enormously. Derek did not hit her. He was not that uncomplicated. What Derek did was something quieter and more corrosive. He diminished her. Systematically, methodically, in the language of affection. Her design work was called a nice hobby. Her opinions in rooms full of his colleagues were redirected or talked over with such smooth, practiced ease that she sometimes wondered if she had spoken at all. When she suggested, in year 4, that she might pursue a master's degree in urban planning, Derek had laughed. Not cruelly, but with the particular warmth of someone explaining something obvious to a child, and said that they had enough going on without her chasing credentials she didn't need. She had not enrolled, not then. What she had done, quietly, without announcement, was begin. 3 nights a week, after Lily was in bed, Mara sat at the kitchen table and worked, not on anything Derek would have recognized as significant. She read voraciously. Urban development theory, infrastructure, investment models, public-private partnership law, the mechanics of how cities grow and where money flows when they do. She began consulting, unpaid at first, for a small nonprofit focused on affordable housing development in the city's eastern corridor. She built relationships with city planners and zoning lawyers and community organizers, the unglamorous connective tissue of urban growth that most people in Derek's world never thought about because they were too busy watching the buildings go up. When the divorce finally came, initiated by Derek, citing irreconcilable differences that he told his family meant her emotional unavailability, and cited to his lawyer meant he had found someone whose admiration was less complicated, Mara received a settlement that Derek's attorney described to him as generous, given her limited professional trajectory. $140,000, the family home, which she sold within 6 months because she could not afford the upkeep alone and primary custody of 2-year-old Lily. Derek took his confidence, his father's investment firm connection, and his new girlfriend Sasha on a vacation to Lisbon within 3 weeks of the papers being signed. Mara enrolled in the master's program the following Monday. That was 7 years ago. In the intervening time, certain things had happened that Mara had not advertised, primarily because she had not thought it was anyone's business, and partly because she had understood, with the calm clarity that had become her defining characteristic, that the time for it to be anyone's business would eventually arrive on its own. She had completed the master's degree in 18 months while working full-time and raising Lily. The degree had formalized what she already knew and unlocked doors that had been technically available to her before, but practically inaccessible without the credential. She had begun consulting on urban redevelopment projects, paid consulting, serious consulting, the kind that involved city councils and environmental impact assessments and infrastructure bonding. Through one of those projects, she had met a man named Philip Okafor, a venture-backed urban technology entrepreneur who was building a platform to optimize city transit infrastructure using predictive data modeling. She had looked at what he was building, and she had immediately understood 3 things. It would work, it would scale, and nobody who needed to fund it had yet grasped what it actually was. She had spent 2 weeks preparing an analysis of the platform's infrastructure implications across 6 American cities. She had sent it to Philip with a cover note that took her 4 hours to write. He had called her within 20 minutes of reading it. That had been 5 years ago. She had joined as a co-founder. She had taken 60% of her remaining savings, $71,000, and converted it to equity at a valuation that, at the time, had seemed like an act of professional courage or possibly hubris, depending on who you asked. Derek, had he known, would have called it reckless. He would have had a point, technically, in the way that people who evaluate risk without understanding vision often have technically defensible points. The company was called Viridian Systems. 18 months after Mara joined, they had closed a Series A round of $42 million. 14 months after that, a Series B of $190 million. The technology had been deployed in 11 cities across North America and 4 in Europe. 7 months ago, Viridian Systems had completed a merger with a publicly traded infrastructure technology company in a deal valued at $4.3 billion. Mara's equity stake, after dilution across the funding rounds, had settled at 12.4%. She had not checked the precise final calculation until her attorney walked her through the closing documents. When the number was confirmed, she had thanked the attorney, driven home, picked up Lily from school, made spaghetti carbonara for dinner, and helped with long division homework. She had not told anyone. She did not feel a particular need to. She drove a 7-year-old Subaru. She still lived in the same apartment she had rented after selling the house. She had recently purchased it as a condominium, upgraded the kitchen, and added a second bathroom, but from the outside, it looked identical. She wore the pale blue sundress to the Whitmore Cookout because it was comfortable and the weather was going to be warm. She had not expected the afternoon to require anything else. Derek was there, of course. He came every year, his membership in the Whitmore social universe predating the marriage and thus surviving it with its standing intact. He came with Sasha, who had become his wife 4 years ago, in a ceremony that several mutual acquaintances attended and described to Mara in the specific, careful way people describe things they assume will be painful. Mara had been in Copenhagen at a transit infrastructure conference that week and had honestly forgotten the date. Sasha Holt, née Bergman, was beautiful in the high-maintenance manner that requires significant daily investment to sustain, and she had the particular social energy of someone who has decided that other people's discomfort is interesting rather than distressing. She wore white to the cookout, which technically spoke for itself, and she had a way of scanning a room that managed to convey assessment without appearing to look. She spotted Mara within 4 minutes of Mara's arrival. Mara was standing near the drink table, pouring lemonade for Lily, when she felt the approach rather than saw it. The subtle shift in social current that precedes deliberate contact. She turned to find Sasha beside her, Derek a step and a half behind with his hands in his chino pockets, wearing the expression he always wore when he was prepared to be amused. "Mara," Sasha said, with the warmth of someone greeting a person they find completely unthreatening. "It's so good that you still come to these." The inflection on "still" did a great deal of work. "Lily loves it," Mara said simply. She glanced at her daughter, who had already spotted her cousins and was straining gently toward them. "Go ahead, baby," she told her, and Lily released her hand and ran toward the other children with the uncomplicated joy of someone who had not yet learned to make events mean more than they do. "She's gotten so big," Derek said in the tone of someone commenting on someone else's child, which was not precisely inaccurate. He saw Lily every other weekend when his schedule allowed, which had lately been averaging once a month. His attorney and Mara's had exchanged letters about this 3 times in the past year. "You look well, Mara. Tired maybe, but, well, I'm not tired," she said, still at the same firm. His tone was gentle with assumption. "I've been doing my own consulting," she said. This was technically accurate in the way that describing the Pacific Ocean as some water is technically accurate. Right. He nodded with the slow thoughtfulness of someone who has already lost interest in the answer. "That's good. Keeps you busy. Something to focus on." He said this with the specific kindness of someone returning a coin they found on the ground. Magnanimous because the amount is negligible. Sasha touched his arm lightly, a move that managed to be both affectionate and territorial. "Derek was just made senior vice president," she said to Mara, and her eyes were very steady. "Regional director oversight. It's a significant role." "Congratulations," Mara said. She meant it, in the distant way you mean it, when something has no bearing on your life whatsoever. "It's a lot of pressure," Derek said modestly, which meant it was not. This was the first exchange of the afternoon. It would not be the last. The cookout moved through its familiar rhythms, burgers and beer, and the particular noise of 60-some people who have known each other long enough to skip the interesting parts of conversation and go straight to the comfortable grooves. Children ran in irregular patterns. Someone's uncle told the same story he told every year. The corn was slightly undercooked. Mara moved through it all with the ease of someone who is comfortable in their own presence, talking genuinely with the people she liked, politely with the people she didn't, and not at all with the people who weren't worth the effort. She was sitting with Margaret Whitmore, Gerald's sister, and the closest thing to a decent person in that immediate social ecosystem when the second exchange happened. Derek had drifted toward them with a small group that included 2 of his finance colleagues, men who had the particular build of people who played competitive golf and considered it character-forming. Sasha was at his elbow. The group had the loose trajectory of people moving toward the drink table, but willing to be delayed by something interesting. "Margaret," Derek said warmly, because he was genuinely fond of Margaret, and she tolerated him, because she had known him since he was 11, then to Mara, as if she were an extension of the furniture. "Still, in that apartment on Calloway?" "Yes," she said. One of the finance men, introduced as Bryce, which suited him precisely, glanced at Mara with the polite blankness reserved for people outside one's professional universe. "What is it you do?" he asked in the friendly, efficient way of someone accustomed to quickly categorizing people. "I'm in urban infrastructure," she said. "Consulting work," Derek clarified to Bryce in a tone that added the silent annotation. "Small scale, nothing significant, not worth the line of inquiry. She does design work, that kind of thing." "Not exactly," Mara said, but lightly, without pressing it. Bryce had already moved on, turning toward Derek with a question about the golf tournament being planned for August. Mara watched this happen with the calm scientific interest of someone observing a process they've studied extensively and no longer find surprising. Sasha leaned slightly in Mara's direction and said quietly, with what could be called a smile if you were charitable, "It must be nice, though, the flexibility, working around Lily's schedule." She paused. "I imagine it's hard, doing it alone, financially especially." The word "alone" was very carefully placed. "We manage," Mara said. "Of course you do," Sasha said warmly. "You've always been so resourceful." She said resourceful, the way one might say scrappy or resilient, words that carry an implicit contrast to the effortlessness of people who don't need to be any of those things. Margaret Whitmore, who had been listening with the quiet attentiveness of someone who has survived 7 decades by watching people more carefully than they watch themselves, caught Mara's eye. There was something in Margaret's expression, not pity, which would have been intolerable, but a kind of careful recognition, as though she were noting coordinates. The afternoon deepened. The light went golden and long, the way July light does when the day is deciding whether to continue or surrender. Children's voices carried across the lawn. Someone started a card game at the picnic table by the garden shed. Mara had retrieved Lily from the cousin cluster to get her a plate of food, and they had settled together on a bench near the old oak at the edge of the property. Mara's favorite spot, one she had claimed at her first Whitmore cookout 14 years ago, and returned to every year since like a small, quiet ritual. It was there that Derek found her again, alone this time, Lily having been recaptured by a cousin with a new relay race idea. He sat beside her with the ease of someone who has decided to be magnanimous, which is the particular posture people adopt when they intend to be cruel and have constructed a justification for it. He had a beer in his hand. He looked out at the lawn rather than at her when he began. "I want to say something," he said, "and I hope you'll take it in the spirit it's meant." Mara waited. She had learned long ago that interrupting this kind of preamble only delayed it. "I worry about you," he said, and his voice had the careful warmth of someone who has rehearsed this. "I know things have been. I know it's not easy. What you're doing, being on your own, the apartment, the consulting work." He paused, letting the picture build. "Lily needs stability, real stability. And I look at you and I think, you were always so capable, Mara, genuinely, but you made choices. And I just wonder, sometimes, if the path you're on is really—" He stopped, as if reconsidering his words on grounds of kindness rather than accuracy. "Sustainable, long-term." The pause after this was not uncomfortable for her. "I appreciate the concern," she said. "I mean it sincerely." He turned to look at her now, and she saw in his face the expression that had once made her feel grateful, the impression of care, the handsome architecture of someone who wants to be perceived as thoughtful. "You could have gone a different direction, more stable, corporate architecture, something that pays reliably. I think sometimes you got, I don't know, caught up in ideas. And ideas don't always pay," she said. "Well," he said, which meant yes. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I'm only saying this because Sasha and I have talked about it, and we've agreed that if things ever got genuinely difficult, financially, I mean, practically, we could look at the arrangement differently. The custody support. I wouldn't want Lily to—" "Derek," her voice was very even. "How much is your annual salary now?" He blinked at the pivot. "That's why." "$240," he said with the faint pride of someone who believes this is a significant number. She nodded. She did not elaborate. She did not explain. She simply nodded, and something In the quality of that nod made him frown slightly, some faint signal reaching him that his instrument was not calibrated to interpret. "I'm doing fine," she said, "but thank you." She stood, smoothed her sundress, and went to find her daughter. It was Margaret Whitmore who caused the rupture. Not deliberately, or perhaps deliberately, depending on how you understood Margaret, who was 81 years old and had decided somewhere in her 70s that the energy required to be tactful was better spent elsewhere. The card game had broken up, and perhaps 30 people had drifted into a loose grouping near the back porch, the natural coalescence of a party in its late afternoon phase, when no one has quite decided to leave, but the energy has shifted from arrival to lingering. Mara was standing at the edge of this group with Margaret and 2 other women she liked, talking about an urban park project in the city's north side that Mara had worked on 3 years prior. Derek and Sasha and the golf tournament men were 6 feet away, in conversation with Gerald Whitmore about real estate investment. The comfortable language of the comfortable, the vocabulary of people for whom money is a subject of strategy rather than anxiety. "Mara," Gerald said, catching her in his peripheral vision and drawing her in with the social reflex of a practiced host. "Weren't you involved in that transit project, the one that got all that press a few years back?" "What was it?" "Viridian," Margaret said quietly from Mara's left. And there it was. The name was not unknown to people in certain rooms. It was not unknown to people who read financial news or tracked infrastructure technology or had any awareness of the largest infrastructure technology deal of the previous decade. It was a name that would have meant something to Bryce, the finance golf man, if he had been paying attention at the right moments to the right publications. It might have meant something to Derek, whose firm managed investment portfolios that included technology infrastructure indices. It did not, in this particular moment, visibly mean anything to anyone in the immediate group except Margaret, who had said it, and Mara, who had built it. "Viridian," Gerald repeated, testing the word. "Was that the transit software thing?" "I read something. Mara was a co-founder," Margaret said, with the particular serene delivery of someone dropping something heavy from a considerable height. "One of the 2 principal architects of the company, as I understand it." She looked at Mara with mild, innocent eyes. "I hope I'm not mischaracterizing." "You're not," Mara said. The quality of the silence that followed was interesting. It had a texture to it, a density, like air before a storm when the pressure has dropped and everything is very still, and the birds have stopped. Bryce was the first to move. He turned toward Mara with the sharp, recalibrated attention of someone whose professional instincts have just fired. "Viridian Systems," he said. "The infrastructure platform." "Yes," Mara said. "That closed the merger with—" He stopped. He looked at her with visible arithmetic happening behind his eyes. Co-founder, a beat. What was your equity position?" Gerald made a noise that suggested this was not entirely polite dinner conversation. But Bryce was looking at Mara with the kind of focused intensity that professional money people bring to numbers that matter. 12.4%, she said, because she saw no reason not to. The arithmetic was not complicated for someone who operated in Bryce's professional sphere. The merger valuation had been public knowledge for 7 months. The number settled on Bryce's face first, then moved through the group like current through water, reaching different people at different speeds depending on their ability to process it. It reached Derek last. She watched it happen. She was not proud of how much she noticed it or how carefully she observed the specific sequence, the initial blankness, then the flicker of recognition as the name connected to something he had probably read or heard in passing and not retained. Then the particular quality of stillness that overtook his face when the arithmetic resolved. 240,000 a year, his number, his confidence, his careful concern about her sustainability, $4.3 billion. 12.4%. Before taxes, before the various instruments and vehicles through which her attorneys and financial advisors had structured the outcome, But the gross figure, the number that sat in the air of the Whitmore backyard on the last Saturday of July, was not ambiguous. Derek started. He stopped. His beer was in his hand, and he seemed to have forgotten it was there. "I've been fine," Mara said. She said it simply, without performance. "I've been doing fine." Sasha had gone very still beside him. Her white dress was catching the late afternoon light. Her expression was a thing Mara did not linger on, not from cruelty, but because it was not the face that interested her. It was Derek's face that interested her, and only in the specific clinical way that a person revisiting an old question is interested in finding the answer at last. Had he ever known her? No. The answer was written plainly on his face in this moment. The shock of it, the complete and total shock, the evidence that he had not merely underestimated her, but had failed to construct any model of her that included this as a possibility. He had looked at her for 6 years of marriage and seen, apparently, exactly what she appeared to be on the surface. A woman with interesting ideas and limited trajectory. He had not seen the depth beneath. He had not tried to. That, more than anything else about the afternoon, was the thing she felt. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Exactly. Something quieter and more complete. The specific piece of a question answered so thoroughly that it no longer needs to be asked. Margaret Whitmore touched her arm with the practiced, gentle precision of a woman who has observed a great many things over 8 decades and learned exactly when touch conveys what words cannot. "You should try the blueberry crumble before it's gone," she said, as though nothing extraordinary had happened, which was, perhaps, the most gracious response available. "I will," Mara said, and followed her toward the dessert table. The conversation that Mara could not entirely avoid happened 15 minutes later, near the garden gate, where she had gone to retrieve Lily's sweater from the bag she'd left hanging on the post. Derek was there before she arrived, which suggested it was not accidental. He looked different than he had an hour ago. The posture was the same. Derek's posture was architectural, built over decades to convey a specific kind of authority, but something beneath it had shifted. The way a building looks the same from outside even when something structural has changed in its bones. "I'd like to talk," he said. "All right, what you?" He paused, started again. "Viridian." "How long?" "5 years." He absorbed this. "During the marriage?" "No. After. I enrolled in the master's program the Monday after the divorce was final. The consulting work that led to Viridian was about 2 years in. I joined as co-founder 3 years after the divorce. You had no idea when we were married that, Derek," she kept her voice level and not unkind. "When we were married, I had ideas. I had capability. I had drive. You didn't see it because you weren't looking for it. That's not an accusation. It's an observation. But I want you to understand that the answer to your question is no. I didn't have Viridian. I had everything that became Viridian. The difference matters." He was quiet for a moment. The garden gate was old iron, slightly rusted at the hinges, and it made a small sound in the July breeze. "The custody agreement," he said, "and what I said earlier about the financial stability." "Forget it," she said. "I need you to know that I wasn't, that I would never use that to. Derek. Trinkrenka." And she said his name with the patience of someone explaining a very simple thing for the very last time. "I have 4 attorneys who ensure that everything regarding Lily is structured and protected in a manner that no conversation at a cookout could ever affect. I'm not telling you that to intimidate you. I'm telling you so that you understand the concern was never necessary, has never been necessary. What I need from you isn't financial consideration. What I need, and what Lily needs, is for you to show up on the weekends you've committed to. That's the only conversation that matters between us." He looked at her for a long moment. 7 years of accumulated assumption looked back at her from his eyes, and beneath it, something that might have been, if she was being generous, the beginning of the particular shame that arrives when someone finally understands what they failed to see. "She's extraordinary," he said quietly. "Yes," Mara said. "She gets it from both sides. Let's not forget that when it's easy and not just when it's convenient." She took the sweater from the bag, closed the gate with the careful attention of someone who respects old things, and walked back toward the lawn, where her daughter was mid-relay race, her arms windmilling, her laughter carrying across the early evening air like something bright and portable. The days that followed held a different kind of quiet. Mara had expected some version of aftermath, and it arrived in the form she most easily managed, the digital kind. The texts from acquaintances whose numbers she had not deleted, the carefully casual inquiries about whether it was true what people were saying about the Viridian deal. The message from Gerald Whitmore himself that read like a man who had been speaking dismissively to a visiting head of state and was working to recalibrate his dignity. She answered what she felt like answering, left the rest on read, and moved through the week at her usual pace. Lily asked, on Sunday evening while they were folding laundry, whether the people at the cookout had been weird about something. "A little," Mara said. "Why?" "Because Grandma Whitmore, she's not really my grandma, but, you know." "I know. Margaret, she texted you 17 times. I saw the notifications on your phone." Margaret is very enthusiastic about texting for an 81-year-old. Lily considered this with the philosophical seriousness she applied to most things. "Are we rich now?" Mara folded a towel with the precise corner-meeting care she'd had since childhood. "We're comfortable," she said. "Like, really comfortable. Or comfortable, comfortable. What's the difference?" Comfortable, comfortable is like, we don't worry about things. Really comfortable is like, Lily searched for the right formulation with the concentration of someone for whom language still feels like a tool being learned rather than one already mastered. Like Grandpa Whitmore's house, comfortable? More than that, Mara said. Lily processed this for approximately 4 seconds, then returned to folding her school t-shirts with the pragmatic lack of drama that Mara had worked hard to cultivate in her. "Can we get a dog?" Lily said. "We can absolutely get a dog," Mara said. There were professional consequences as well, of the sort that Mara had anticipated would eventually arrive through some channel or another, but had not specifically engineered the cookout to produce. Within 3 weeks of the gathering, 2 of Gerald Whitmore's business associates had contacted her consulting office. A proper office, 3 people, on the 4th floor of a building 2 miles from her apartment. Not the kitchen table operation that Derek had presumably imagined, with inquiries about urban development advisory work. Bryce, the finance golf man, sent a formal email through a mutual professional contact that was so precisely calibrated to be both apologetic and businesslike that Mara almost admired the construction of it. She responded professionally and without reference to the cookout, because there was nothing to be gained from the reference. Derek called on a Tuesday, 4 days after the gathering. Not to discuss Lily, or rather ostensibly about Lily, but Mara could read the shape of the conversation before it began, and simply waited, with the same patient attention she had always been capable of and he had always mistaken for passivity. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the schedule. The visitation. I know I've been. I think I should do better. I'd like to do every other weekend as agreed. Consistently. That would be good," she said. "Lily would like that. I realize I've not." A pause. "It's easy to get absorbed in things. Work, the new role. I've been using that as a reason when it's actually just." Another pause. "I want to do better by her." "Good," Mara said. "Then do." There was a silence between them that had a different quality than the silences of the afternoon at the cookout. Less the silence of power being assessed and redistributed, more the silence of 2 people who once shared a life, looking at the remains of it and deciding what to do with what's left. "I underestimated you," he said finally, "for a long time. I want to say that directly." Mara was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, the city moved through its afternoon. A delivery truck double-parked. A woman walked a very small dog with very great dignity. The ordinary choreography of a city. She had spent a decade understanding from the inside out, learning its bones and its infrastructure and its hidden logic, until she could predict where it would grow before it grew there. "You didn't underestimate me," she said finally. "You decided who I was before you had enough information. That's different. Underestimating implies you tried to measure and got the number wrong. You didn't try to measure." He didn't respond immediately, and in the silence she could hear him receiving this, and she felt no particular need to elaborate. "What you've built," he said. "I've read about Viridian properly. Now, what it does, the impact. It's genuinely remarkable. Philip Okafor built the technology," she said. "I built the case for why cities needed it and structured the partnerships that got it deployed. It was collaborative. It always is. Still." "Yes," she agreed. Still, the call ended without drama or ceremony, which was perhaps its own kind of progress. Mara sat with the phone in her hand for a moment after, not in reflection on Derek, specifically, but on the longer arc of things. The Tuesday in March, 7 years ago, when she had signed her name with a steady hand. The kitchen table, 3 nights a week. Conference calls at dawn with municipal officers in time zones that required a kind of disciplined early rising she had built into herself like a habit of prayer. She had not built any of it for the cookout. She had not built it against Derek, or to prove anything to anyone at the Whitmore gathering, or to land with satisfying weight in a conversation by a garden gate on a warm July evening. She had built it because she had seen something that needed building, and she had understood how to build it, and she had simply refused to stop. That the world had arranged for a recognition scene was the world's business, not hers. She had only shown up for the potato salad and the sparklers. 3 weeks after the cookout, Mara did something she had been considering for approximately 4 months. She met with the board of a regional affordable housing nonprofit. Not the same one she had volunteered with in the early days of her marriage, but a newer organization with a sharper operational model and a clearer theory of change. And she pledged a founding gift of $22 million to capitalize a revolving loan fund for mixed-income urban development projects in 3 cities. The pledge came with specific structural conditions that she had developed over several months with her team. Conditions that were designed to ensure the capital actually produced housing units rather than getting absorbed into organizational overhead. The gift was announced quietly in a press release that the nonprofit distributed, without photographs and without a quote longer than 2 sentences from Mara herself. Several urban planning publications covered it. The city planning director of one of the 3 target cities sent her a handwritten note on government letterhead, which she put in the drawer of her desk rather than framing it, because she had never quite understood the impulse to display one's own achievements inside one's own office. Lily got the dog, a rescue, medium-sized, emphatically enthusiastic about everything, with a coat the color of weak tea and the conviction that the apartment was slightly too small for the life he needed to live. Lily named him Archimedes, which Mara had not seen coming, but immediately recognized as correct. He slept at the foot of Lily's bed and knocked things off low surfaces with his tail and filled the apartment with the specific warm disorder of a creature who has no interior life, only exterior joy. Margaret Whitmore came to tea in September and sat in the kitchen with Mara for 2 hours, drinking Earl Grey and talking about the City Park project and a memoir she was writing about her years as a civil rights attorney in the 1970 seconds, which she described with the matter-of-fact precision of someone who has always known which things are interesting and which are merely impressive. Before she left, standing in the doorway, with her coat half-buttoned, she said something that Mara had been returning to since. "You know what I noticed," Margaret said, "that afternoon at Gerald's." "What's that?" "You never corrected anyone." She said this with the specific satisfaction of a woman for whom observation is the highest form of attention. When Derek said design work, when Bryce assumed, when Sasha said resourceful, You never corrected. You just—" She pressed her lips together, searching for the word, waited. "Correcting people who have already decided what you are," Mara said, "rarely changes what they've decided. It just tells them they've made you uncomfortable." Margaret buttoned the last button. Her eyes were the particular bright gray of someone who has collected a great deal of living and organized it sensibly. "My late husband said something similar. He was a very quiet man." She paused. "The quiet ones always have the most to say." She left, and Mara closed the door, and Archimedes appeared from the hallway, demanding acknowledgement. And from down the corridor she could hear Lily on a video call with her cousins, describing with great animation and some inaccuracy the relay race she had definitively won at the cookout. The ordinary evening assembled itself around her. The city's hum came through the windows with the comfortable familiarity of a language she had spent years learning until it stopped being translation and became thought. The infrastructure of a million small decisions, the transit lines and water mains, and broadband conduits and load-bearing policies beneath every visible surface of urban life, continued its invisible, reliable work, as it always did, as it would whether anyone was watching or not. This was the thing that most people didn't understand about the kind of work Mara did, and perhaps about the kind of person Mara was. The value was not in the announcement. It was not in the recognition or the moment at the garden gate or the number that moved through a backyard party like a current. The value was in the thing itself, the actual function, the actual impact, the transit rider who got to work 3 minutes faster, the family that got an affordable unit in a neighborhood with good schools, the city block that was someday a park where it had once been a parking structure. The rest of it, the 7 years of being seen as diminished, the careful condescension of a man who had measured her against his own limitations and found the comparison flattering to himself, the white dress and the strategic word resourceful and the well-intentioned worry about her sustainability. All of that was context. It was not the story. The story was the work, and the work continued. But here's what I want you to take from this, and why I think this story is worth telling beyond its satisfying architecture. Mara never announced herself. She never performed her capability to the people who dismissed it. She did not spend any of the 7 years between the divorce and the cookout constructing a response to Derek's assumptions. She was simply too busy building something real to bother constructing a rebuttal to something false. There is a kind of power in that. Not the power of hidden wealth or equity stakes or boardrooms, but the deeper power of a person who knows exactly who they are and does not require anyone else's confirmation to continue being that person. The money was real, and the impact was real, and the work was real, and these things were true, whether Gerald Whitmore ever had them at his cookout or not. The people in our lives who underestimate us are often doing us a favor we don't recognize as one. Their low ceiling forces us outside, into the open, where there is no ceiling at all. Derek had told her, in year 4 of their marriage, that she didn't need the credentials she was chasing. He was wrong about this in ways he could not have calculated. But, perhaps, and this is the part Mara herself had arrived at, in the quiet of evenings when Archimedes was asleep and Lily was doing homework, and the city murmured its complicated hymn, perhaps she should thank him. The dismissal had been clarifying. The underestimation had been, in its way, a door. She had walked through it. She had kept walking. But, she had arrived 7 years later at a backyard in Claremont Heights in a consignment shop sundress, carrying pasta salad, holding her daughter's hand, needing nothing. That, in the end, was the whole of it. End quote. If Mara's story resonated with you today, if you've ever stood in a room where someone decided who you were before you had the chance to show them, leave a comment below. I read every one of them. And if this is your first time here, this is what we do. We tell stories about people who are quiet where others are loud, patient where others are hasty, and right when everyone else is certain they're wrong. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because I promise you, the next story is worth staying for. Until then, keep building. The right people will eventually notice, and if they don't, build anyway.